Chin down, chin up. I don't know.
It's perfect. So you can look at me. You look amazing
right.
anyway. You're a beautiful woman.
Thank you.
Talking about what you are doing right now, because it would be also important for me to see which field you are in, so that you can talk about I'm doing this, I'm doing that, so I know a little bit what it is. Could you please do me a favor, introduce yourself, and tell us what you're doing?
Okay, well, I'm Hala Matar Choufany. I head up HVS business in the Middle East and Africa region. We are very focused on the hospitality industry. We're financial advisors, but despite the fact that we are predominantly looking after investments within the hospitality sector, we also cover other types of mixed use or hospitality derivatives. So we look at hotels, service apartments, marina, recreational facilities. And the type of work we provide actually is for predominantly investors, developers, banks, and we are looking to determine the viability and feasibility of projects and what is it actually to do, what sort of development, at what level, what price point to come into the market, what sort of target markets we're looking at. So really helping investors or developers determine what is the most suitable investment strategy and then help them through actually implementing this development through raising the finance required to complete the project, assisting them with finding the right fit of operator, negotiating the HMAs of these operators, and then eventually once the property is up and running, we come in also to assist with ensuring that the property value is maximized, that it does operate with the right operational efficiencies, that there is quite a good and effective management in place. And ultimately, our core service is valuation, so that would be in terms of transactions, selling and buying. This is something that in this part of the world, and I was sat on a panel yesterday discussing specifically mergers and acquisitions. Obviously, when we compare the Middle East to other parts of Europe, this is an extremely small market. Actually, we define it as being an illiquid, and when it does transact, it's a market that is not transparent at all. So we're way behind that cycle in the sense of exchanging hands on assets. And I think this is not just because of the newness of the industry in this part of the world, it also has to do with the structure of the owning entities. So predominantly these projects are developed or supported by the government, and therefore they are not your typical buyer or typical seller where they're coming into the market, short-term strategy, they flip the asset and they move on to develop another asset.
So that's quite interesting. Can you give us a little bit more insight in how this market works, or what kind of trends you see in the next couple of years or right now?
I mean, specifically when I make reference to market, I'm not just speaking about the UAE, but at the moment perhaps we shouldn't focus also too much on Africa, because this is yet to develop and we are at a very early stage. So, whatever trend, it's very difficult. What I'm trying to say, it's very difficult to determine trends for Africa as yet. But obviously in the Middle East, there are some consistent trends, be it on the development front. Every market pretty much, whether Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Muscat, Qatar, Kuwait perhaps less so, but then if we look at Jeddah, Riyadh, Mecca, Medina in Saudi, all these markets have a very aggressive pipeline of hotel projects and hotel derivatives. So it's not just hotel projects, a lot of real estate projects naturally, a lot of infrastructure projects. So the trend of development is applicable to all these markets. The foreign direct investment or the investment that relates to the travel and tourism is strong, and it has been on the increase. So this is a very consistent trend. In terms of the hotel market at the moment, yes, we can see some differences. So we could argue that potentially Dubai is a much more mature market and a much more diversified market when we compare it to Riyadh. Looking at Riyadh, it is predominantly a corporate market, similar to Doha, for instance, whereas Jeddah does attract a good mix of corporate leisure. Now, Dubai also attracts a good amount of corporate versus the leisure. Abu Dhabi is trying to tap into the leisure more, just to balance out its product offering. But the trend of the transactions, this is what I was referring to earlier, is we're not there yet. I mean, we're in a very early stage of development, and this is applicable to the entire region. Naturally, fast forwarding 5 to 10 years, we're going to look back and, from the Middle Eastern or GCC countries, the GCC would be the most established vis-a-vis the Middle East, because I'm assuming also by then that there has the geopolitical issues at the moment would have eased or ceased totally, ideally, that there will be newer cities that will become attractive for investment purposes, such as Syria, which is now totally torn down, Iraq. We're going to be looking at Iran very closely. So, I think as a region as a whole, we've seen the development cycle of the GCC, and in the next 5 years, this will be maturing. And then we're going to come into the newer phase of seeing the development of the other Middle Eastern countries develop then into maturity over the 10 to 15 years.
So that means you see a lot of potential still. There's a lot of money to make and a lot of money to invest.
Oh, certainly. I mean, definitely, if we look at the performance, strictly the performance, whether it's, airport arrivals, airport expansions, increase in routes, airlift, for the predominant main players such as Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways, the numbers are on the increase. If we look at accommodated room nights in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Bahrain, Muscat, this has also been on the increase year on year. And I have no reason to think, despite, again, all the issues, whether it's oil related, price related, the dollar strengthening, other currencies weakening, I have, on a personal level, no reason to believe that this is going to impact significantly or impact the travel and tourism industry in this part of the world, specifically the established cities such as the GCC with the right infrastructure in place. I am quite confident that despite also the new supply that will be coming in, and that there's a lot of talks about how will eventually the dynamics between supply and demand affect the relative markets, that there is also still a lot of growth that could be realized into this region. And this is evident if we look at the last 7 to 10 years. The growth of visitation into the Middle East has grown year on year. It does fluctuate between a double-digit growth. Ideally, this is where we'd like to be, but there has been growth.
Interesting. Where does the money come from? Where does the investment money come from mainly? Is it from Saudi? Is it oil money? Is it from rich families? Is it international money?
I mean, this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier on about the type of investors and developers. We in this part of the world, institutional developers or private developers are much less than the government entities. Predominantly, the project is from rich governments, so whether we're talking about Saudi or the UAE or even in Bahrain, a lot of the projects are driven by the government. It does attract a fair share of foreign direct investment, but keeping in mind that within the GCC region, there's a lot of restrictions on foreign ownership. Under the freehold model or the leasehold model, which naturally restricts foreign investments into certain parts. Obviously, Dubai is way advanced with the creation of multiple free zones, and therefore we are seeing Russian investment and Iranian investment and Indian investment and the European investment. But this is not the norm. These are much fewer when we look at the overall investors in the market.
Talking about the conference, why are you at this conference? Why is AHIC important for you?
I mean, it provides a good connecting opportunity, be it with investors, be it with industry colleagues, service providers, operators. We are key players in the market, and equally attendees of AHIC are key players and decision makers. It's an opportunity basically to connect, and whether to create new relationships or to enhance existing relationships.
Thank you very much for taking your time and for giving us a little bit of insight in your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm very curious.